In the early 20th century, the world was on the brink of a technological revolution. Cities were growing, electricity was spreading, and humans had begun to conquer the skies and the oceans with machines that seemed almost impossible only decades before. It was during this golden age of progress and innovation that the RMS Titanic was born, a ship so massive, so luxurious, and so advanced for its time that many believed it was unsinkable. The Titanic was built by the shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff in Belfast, Ireland. Construction began in 1909 and lasted nearly 3 years. The ship measured almost 269 meters, 882 feet, in length, and weighed more than 46,000 tons. At the time, it was the largest man-made moving object in the world. The Titanic was part of the White Star Line, a company that sought to dominate transatlantic travel with ships that symbolized not just transportation, but wealth, prestige, and modern engineering. What made the Titanic so legendary, even before its first voyage, was not only its size, but its luxury. Inside, the ship resembled a floating palace. First-class passengers could enjoy dining rooms modeled after the grand restaurants of Paris, smoking lounges decorated in the style of gentlemen's clubs in London, and suites that rivaled the finest hotels of Europe. There was a swimming pool, a Turkish bath, squash courts, libraries, and promenades where the wealthiest travelers could stroll while enjoying the salty Atlantic breeze. At the same time, the Titanic was divided by strict social class distinctions. While the rich occupied the upper decks in opulence, second-class passengers lived in more modest but still comfortable accommodations. The third-class passengers, mostly immigrants seeking a better life in America, were placed deep within the ship with simple bunk-style rooms. Yet even the third-class quarters on the Titanic were considered more luxurious than many ships of that era. But the Titanic wasn't just beautiful. It was also advertised as one of the safest ships ever built. Its hull was divided into 16 watertight compartments, and the builders claimed that even if 4 of these compartments flooded, the ship would still remain afloat. This feature, combined with the size and the advanced technology, gave rise to the myth that the Titanic was unsinkable. Newspapers picked up this phrase, and the legend spread. On April the 10th in 1912, the Titanic set out on its maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City. More than 2,200 passengers and crew were on board. Among them were some of the wealthiest people in the world: American millionaire John Jacob Astor IV, industrialist Benjamin Guggenheim, Macy's department store co-owner Isidor Straus, and many others. But alongside them were hundreds of poor families from Ireland, Britain, and other European countries who sold nearly everything they had for a ticket that could bring them to a new life in America. The departure of the Titanic was celebrated with enormous fanfare. Thousands of people gathered to watch the massive ship leave port. It was not just a voyage, it was a symbol of human achievement, of modern industry and progress. The Titanic stopped briefly in Cherbourg, France, to pick up more passengers, then again in Queenstown, Ireland, before heading westward into the vast Atlantic Ocean. For the first few days, the journey was smooth. The weather was calm, the sea was still, and passengers enjoyed the luxuries of the ship. The wealthy dined on multi-course meals served on fine china, with menus that included oysters, lamb, and French desserts. And if the work was high, the captain was present all the time to turn people into cuts, and middle-class passengers walked the decks and read in the libraries, while third-class passengers gathered for dances and music in the evenings. Life on board felt safe, joyful, and almost magical. Yet beneath the surface, danger lurked. The Titanic was steaming through waters known to contain icebergs. During April, huge chunks of ice drifted south from Greenland into the shipping lanes. Other ships in the area sent ice warnings by wireless telegraph, which the Titanic's radio operators received. However, the ship's captain, Edward J. Smith, did not slow down. Smith was one of the most experienced captains in the White Star Line, and perhaps he too believed in the Titanic's invincibility. He kept the ship traveling at nearly 22 knots, close to top speed, determined to arrive in New York on time and prove the greatness of the vessel. On the evening of April the 14th, 1912, the temperature dropped sharply as the Titanic entered colder waters. The night was unusually calm, the sea was flat, the sky clear, and the moon absent. These conditions made icebergs more difficult to see because there were no waves breaking at their bases. The lookouts, stationed high in the crow's nest, had only binoculars and their eyes to warn of danger. At 11:40 p.m., one of the lookouts, Frederick Fleet, suddenly spotted a dark shape ahead. He rang the bell 3 times and shouted down the telephone, "Iceberg, right ahead!" The officers on the bridge reacted immediately. First Officer William Murdoch ordered the ship to turn sharply to port and reversed the engines, but at such speed and with such a massive vessel, it was too late. Moments later, the Titanic struck the iceberg on its starboard side. The collision was not dramatic. There was no huge crash, no great shattering sound. Many passengers barely felt the impact. But below the waterline, the iceberg ripped open the hull, puncturing 6 of the ship's watertight compartments. Water began to flood in rapidly. Captain Smith and the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, inspected the damage. Their conclusion was devastating. The Titanic could not survive. At best, it had only a couple of hours before it would sink beneath the icy Atlantic. When Captain Smith understood the scale of the disaster, he gave the order to prepare the lifeboats. But here lay another tragic flaw. The Titanic, though enormous, carried only 20 lifeboats, enough for just about half of the people on board. Regulations at the time did not require more because ships were considered safe, and lifeboats were seen mostly as a means of ferrying passengers to rescue vessels, not as a way to hold the entire population. As the crew worked to uncover the boats, confusion spread among passengers. Most of them had no idea how serious the situation was. The Titanic was so massive that, at first, it barely seemed to sink. The electric lights were still on, the music played, and many passengers were reluctant to leave the warmth of the lounges for the freezing night outside. Some even laughed at the suggestion of abandoning the unsinkable ship. At 12:05 a.m., the first lifeboats were lowered into the sea. Crew members followed the rule of women and children first, yet even then mistakes were made. Many boats were launched half empty. Lifeboat 07, for example, left with only 28 people aboard, though it had space for more than 6. Wealthier passengers from first class were often given priority, while many from third class found themselves locked behind gates and corridors, desperately trying to reach the decks above. Meanwhile, below decks, the situation grew dire. Water rushed in through the breached compartments, flooding engine rooms and storage areas. The bow of the ship began to dip lower, and the stern slowly lifted. Crewmen fought to pump out water, but it was hopeless. The Titanic was doomed. By 1:00 IMM, panic spread. The angle of the deck was now noticeable, and passengers realized the ship was sinking. Distress rockets were fired into the night sky, but there were no ships close enough to respond immediately. The Californian, a ship just 10-15 miles away, had turned off its wireless for the night and did not answer. The nearest vessel that did respond, the Carpathia, was over 50 miles away and would not arrive for several hours. The band, led by Wallace Hartley, famously continued to play music as chaos unfolded. Survivors later recalled the musicians performing waltzes and hymns, their notes drifting across the freezing air, trying to calm those who faced the unthinkable. For many, this music became the last sound they ever heard. On the decks, acts of bravery and tragedy unfolded side by side. Milieu Benjamin Guggenheim, realizing his fate, reportedly changed into his finest evening clothes and said he wanted to go down like a gentleman. Isidore and Ida Strauss, the co-owners of Macy's department store, refused to be separated. When Ida was offered a place on a lifeboat, she stepped back, declaring, "Where you go, I go." They perished together. By 2:00 a.m., the last lifeboats were being lowered. Hundreds of people remained trapped on the ship. Many jumped into the icy Atlantic waters, where the temperature was just below freezing. Death from hypothermia came in minutes. Survivors described haunting scenes, people clinging to debris, crying out in the darkness, voices slowly fading until silence flickered the ocean. At 2:18 a.m., the Titanic's lights flickered and went out. The ship's stern rose dramatically into the air, almost vertical. Moments later, the immense vessel broke apart. Witnesses saw the stern and bow separate, with the stern lingering for a brief, terrifying moment before plunging downward. At 2:20 a.m., April 15, 1912, the Titanic disappeared beneath the surface of the Atlantic, leaving over 1,500 people dead. Only about 705 survived. For hours, lifeboats floated among the wreckage, carrying survivors who huddled together for warmth, watching the stars and waiting. At dawn, the Carpathia finally arrived, pulling the freezing, exhausted survivors aboard. The sea was littered with debris, life jackets, and the bodies of those who had not made it. When the survivors reached New York, the world was in shock. The Titanic had been a symbol of modern progress, of human achievement, and in a single night, it was gone. Families were shattered, fortunes lost, and myths about human mastery over nature were broken. In the days that followed, inquiries were held in both Britain and the United States. Testimonies revealed shocking failures. Not enough lifeboats, poor communication, lack of emergency drills, and the dangerous belief in the ship's unsinkability. The tragedy forced sweeping changes in maritime law. Ships were now required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board, to conduct regular safety drills, and to maintain 24-hour radio watches. Decades later, the story of the Titanic continued to haunt and fascinate people. Expeditions to the wreck, discovered in 1985, nearly 4,000 meters below the ocean's surface, revealed eerie images of the ship lying broken in the darkness, preserved in silence. Movies, books, and documentaries kept the memory alive, ensuring that the Titanic was never forgotten. But beyond the steel and technology, the Titanic is remembered most for its human stories of love, sacrifice, courage, and tragedy. It was a moment when the confidence of an age collided with the power of nature, reminding humanity that no matter how advanced, we remain fragile before the sea.